there's a bit of a synergy there for a political expression of the class politics. It's an opening for that kind of political vision that was not there at all in the 1990s.
Barry, you mentioned that you were in the Teamsters for a Democratic Union, not in it, but you were a staffer for it after coming out of UAW when you were a grad student. When about was that you spent your 6 years on staff at TDU?
So that was before grad school. This was from 1997 to 2003. So I interviewed for my job at TDU the day after the 1996 Teamster election was overturned, and 2 weeks after the 1997 UPS strike. So I basically just arrived for the decline of Teamster reform in the late 90s, right when the overturning of the 96 election was the beginning of the end for the Ron Kerry administration, where Ron Kerry was, quite unfairly, expelled from the union for campaign violations committed by some consultants that he hired. But then I continued working for TDU through 2003. But those are fairly those were tough years for Teamster reform. Like Paul said, I would not have thought that the TDU convention would host both the Teamster General President and the UAW International President at their convention. The conventions were much smaller affairs. We struggled to get 150 people in the room, unlike today where there were 500 people at the last TDU convention. And just the possibilities are just so much larger, right? With with the coalition, with Sean O'Brien, not that O'Brien offers everything that the reform movement has fought for by any stretch, but creates these openings for a more grassroots kind of Teamster reform than we've seen in 25 years.
So, Barry, talking about your time with the TDU, you wrapped that up in 2003, and you said that basically you got in right on time, and this will make you feel super great. I was born in '96, so you said that you were. You came in right on the tail end of, or at the high point of Teamsters reform, and it was all downhill from there. And I'm wondering how does today feel compared to '97? Because if you were a militant unionist, you've got a lot of reasons to be excited in 96 and 97, right? I mean, the New Voices slate, I think is what it was called, with the AFL-CIO. You've got Ron Kerry. You've got the Teamsters strike. I mean, there's a lot happening in 97, and the density that unions had was more than double, I think, or something like double what we have right now. So there's really a lot of
50%.
Do what?
About 50% more, is I think in the 16% range instead of the 10% range.
Gotcha. Yeah. So so there was a lot of reason to be hopeful in 96, 97, 95, and there's a lot of reason to be hopeful today. Do you feel like what are the differences and similarities and maybe things that people didn't do in 96 that we can be doing now to prevent what happened after 96 in the labor movement, which is nothing?
That's a great question. So, if I'm thinking about it, in the 1990s, yes, there was a lot of talk of like labor's revival, I think with the Sweeney New Voices slate. And then the Teamsters strike. There was also a lot of people were really excited about the United Farm Workers Strawberry campaign. the Justice for Janitors with SEIU. There's definitely a lot of stuff going on. I think the difference, there's two main differences that I see when I compare back then with where we are now. And the biggest one goes back to the point I was making in response to Paul's question about the character of the sort of more bottom-up, worker-led organizing character of what we're seeing today. So what people saw in the 90s, so the UPS strike, the 1997 UPS strike, was more along the lines of what we're seeing now, with a reform movement that had fought for the right to vote, and the Teamsters had gotten a reformer elected, who then, put together a contract campaign that won this pretty incredible victory. But that was sort of one instance. That was sort of a one-off. The rest of what we were seeing was much more of a staff-led kind of labor revival, right? So Justice for Janitors was sort of hatched in the strategic planning offices of SEIU. The New Voices slate was, some called it at the time like a palace coup, right? Where you basically just had this exhausted, backward, old guard AFL-CIO leadership that just wasn't up to the task. And so you had the bit more dynamic group of labor officials who broke from them and saw their opportunity to sort of take the reins. But it wasn't part of a sort of bottom-up upsurge that was transforming the labor movement. And you compare that to now, where a lot of the movement that we're seeing is really this much more organic grassroots kind of thing, which is really a necessary precondition for any kind of broader upsurge in the labor movement. It really has to come from the bottom up. That's not to say at all that leadership doesn't matter. And I think we're seeing, with the Teamsters and the UAW, the difference that having a more militant leadership in place can make. And we can talk about, the differences there. But you need that grassroots energy that is sort of spreading to create that dynamic. So that's number one. Number two is a bit of a bigger picture thing, which is that, the 90s is sort of in some ways like the height of I'm going to sound all academic now, but it's like the height of neoliberal hegemony, right? It's the height of, it's like Bill Clinton and, the sort of the DNC, the Democratic National, the New Democrats, and their whole idea of like this, third way that gets beyond the class divisions of the past and the old way of doing politics. And it's really, the idea of a broader class vision, the idea of a class politics is really absent on the American political scene in that time. You just have like the left is just really weak to non-existent for the most part. And so even though you have these signs of life within the labor movement, there's not much to back it up politically. And it also is not necessarily based, it's still a lot of the old players, from the 70s, from the new left sort of coming back. And, there isn't really as much of a generational transfer. Whereas I think today, in the aftermath of Occupy and then the Bernie Sanders campaigns, and then, the growth in Democratic Socialism of America, DSA, have contributed to this sort of broader political shift that has both fed and been fed by this worker organizing. And so there's a bit of more of a synergy there for a political expression of a class politics, very, tentative. I wouldn't say, it's not some fully developed class politics by any stretch, but it's an opening for that kind of political vision that was not there at all in the 1990s. And so I think that those are really the two big differences when you compare the two moments.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
So I'm taking this as an invitation to talk about my Jacobin article on what is the rank and file strategy. So yes, I have been someone who's written about and been a proponent for something called the rank and file strategy. And that starts from the premise that in order to have, to build a powerful working class movement that is a necessary precondition for a socialist movement that can actually transform society, you need to transform unions from the bottom up. And you can't do that on staff. You have to do it. It's the members that need to transform the union. And historically speaking, labor unions have a sort of a key sort of dynamic force within the labor movement in periods of upsurge has been this leadership layer of more militant sort of class conscious workers who are widely respected by their coworkers. I think that's an important qualification there. This is not just a bunch of hothead radicals who want to sell their paper and talk about Marx and Lenin and Trotsky all day, and tell people about the Cuban Revolution or U.S. imperialism or something like that.
You mean
not to say that
you don't think that arguing about Lenin with your coworkers is a really great way to advance the labor movement?
Not at the current moment, no. Surprise. Shocking. Your listeners can't see this, but I'm saying this as someone who has the complete 45 volumes of the collected works of Lenin sitting on my bookshelf right above the screen. So that you can take that. So I know of which I speak in terms of the importance of not doing that. But,
enjoyable as it may be.
Yes. So the point being that that this leadership layer of workers who have a broader political perspective, informed by a more radical political vision, but able to command respect and leadership in the workplace, right, plays this critical role in building a more dynamic labor movement that can actually organize at scale and can actually, fight for big things and can win big things. And that layer has been largely eliminated in the U.S. labor movement over the past several decades for a variety of reasons that I've talked about in pieces I've written. And so a key task for people who are serious about rebuilding the labor movement has to be rebuilding that layer. And some of that comes from, and ultimately that has to come from, rebuilding the working class composition of the left, right? I think it's easy to see a divide. I mean, the divide is very apparent today between sort of the organized working class and the left, in a way that it wasn't, before World War II, right? Before World War II, left movements in the United States were overwhelmingly comprised of workers and farmers, or some combination of those. And it's only in the post-war period that you see a severing of that link, and you see a left that is much less based in the working class. And so I see it as sort of a key task for rebuilding the labor movement to re-link, to re-embed the left in the organized working class, essentially. And so one of the ways, one particular tactic, and I think this is important to emphasize, this is one tactic amongst many, is for people with various kinds of left ideology, whatever they consider that to be, whatever variety of socialism, is that you need to be organizing in workplaces and building unions. And if it's an existing union, that's important, because you can then mobilize that infrastructure that's already in place. You can start getting into the work of rebuilding learning the ropes, and then actually doing the hard work of sort of transforming the union, using that existing infrastructure, and leading to things like what we've seen in the Teamsters and the UAW. Hopefully, that's sort of a positive outcome. There's a lot of other sort of smaller scale versions of that, obviously, but that you need to actually be in these places where socialists can actually exert some sort of power, right? And that really comes from the workplace. And that's not at all to say that staff have no role, right? Staff, play important roles in implementing strategy, but they can't be agents of transformation within unions, because their employment depends on doing what their bosses, who are the existing union leaders, tell them to do. There's little room to maneuver. And so, yes, if you're in a union that has a leadership that is committed to this more militant, more class conscious vision, then yeah, staff job can be great, because you're going to be implementing that vision. But if you're looking to transform a union, it's going to be very hard to do that via a staff route.
Oh boy, do I know that. As someone who is a leftist who took a staff job at 25 years old, in a very conservative, not even union, professional organization, they would describe themselves as, seeking, that transformation. Yeah, I know that very well. And I think so much of what you've said has resonated.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.